These three truths: that diagnosing everyone else makes you blind to your own dysfunction, that being the expert makes asking for help feel like admitting you're a fraud, and that you're often most blind to the wound you're best at healing in others, create the perfect conditions for the bleeding healer. Together, they explain why a therapist can help dozens of people heal while being completely unable to see her own wounds. Why a woman with a doctorate can be just as desperate for validation as someone with no credentials. Why expertise doesn't equal wholeness, while helping others doesn't mean you've helped yourself. The professional identity protects you from acknowledging the wound. The isolation of being the expert prevents you from asking for help. The blindedness or the blindness to your own patterns ensures the wound keeps bleeding. And in the space between these forces, the bleeding continues, not despite your expertise, but hidden behind it. But there is another way, a path beyond the performance of having it together and the isolation it creates. This path begins with a radical proposition. What if being a healer doesn't mean you're healed? What if having expertise doesn't mean you've transcended your own wounds? What if helping others is actually easier than helping yourself, and that's exactly why you choose it? Imagine a life where you didn't have to perform having it together, where you could admit you're struggling without shattering your professional identity, where you could be patient or be the patient, sometimes instead of always the healer. Imagine being able to say, I help others with this because I'm still working through it myself. Imagine the relief of not having to pretend you've transcended the human experience just because you have credentials. Imagine being honest about your wounds instead of hiding them behind expertise. Imagine asking for help instead of bleeding out in ways you call empowerment. Imagine being vulnerable about your struggles instead of performing strength you don't feel. This isn't fantasy. This is what becomes possible when you stop using your professional identity as a shield and start being honest about your humanity. But getting there requires facing the fear you've been avoiding. The fear that if people knew you were still wounded, they'd stop trusting your ability to help them heal. And here's the truth about that fear. It's backwards. People don't trust healers who claim to be beyond wounds. They trust healers who are honest about still working through their own. They don't connect with experts who pretend to have transcended struggle. They connect with humans who are willing to be vulnerable about theirs. Your wounds don't disqualify you from helping others. Your willingness to acknowledge them actually makes you more qualified, because it means you're not just teaching theory, you're living the work. You're not just diagnosing from a distance, you're healing alongside your clients. Start with this practice. Notice when you're giving advice you don't follow. Notice when you're diagnosing patterns in others that you're blind to it in yourself. Notice when you're performing expertise to avoid acknowledging your own wounds. These moments reveal where the bleeding is happening in your life. They show you where you're using your professional identity as armor, where you're helping others to avoid helping yourself. When you notice these patterns, ask yourself, if a client came to me with this behavior, what would I tell them it means? What wound would I say they're trying to medicate? Then apply that same insight to yourself. Don't give yourself a pass just because you're the expert. Don't reframe your dysfunction as empowerment just because acknowledging it feels threatening to your identity. Be honest with yourself as you would be with your client. Be as willing to see your patterns as you see, or as you're able to see theirs. Be compassionate with your wounds as you are with the wounds of the people that you help. And next, practice asking yourself, not as the expert seeking consultation, as a human who's struggling and needs support. This will feel terrifying at first, of course. Every part of you will resist this. Your professional identity will scream that admitting you need help undermines your credibility. Your ego will insist you should be beyond this. Your fear will convince you that being vulnerable means being weak. Notice these thoughts without acting on them. Recognize them as the mirror or the armor trying to protect you from the very vulnerability that would actually heal you. And choose honesty anyway. Not because it's comfortable, but because the alternative is continuing to bleed out while calling it empowerment. Here's what might happen. You might discover that being honest about your wounds doesn't destroy your credibility, that admitting you're still working through things actually deepens your connection with the people you help. That vulnerability doesn't make you less of an expert, it makes you more human. Or you might discover that some people can't handle your humanity, that they need you to be the expert who has it all figured out, that they're uncomfortable with the healer who admits she's still healing. And if that happens, it's information. It tells you those people weren't connecting with you. They were connecting with the image you were performing. And losing connections built on performance is actually a gift because it makes space for connections built on truth. Either way, you'll be living authentically rather than performing expertise. You'll be healing your own wounds rather than just diagnosing them in others. You'll be choosing vulnerability over the isolation of always being the expert. Finally, examine your relationship with your professional identity itself. Are you a human who helps people heal? Or are you the healer who can't acknowledge her own humanity? Be honest with yourself. If your identity is so wrapped up in being the expert that admitting you're wounded feels impossible, then the issue isn't your wounds, it's your relationship with your identity. And until you're willing to be human first and expert second, you'll keep using your credentials as armor. You'll keep helping others to avoid helping yourself. You'll keep bleeding out while insisting you're fine. This isn't a quick fix. The pattern of the wounded healer has deep roots in the need to be needed, the fear of being ordinary, the belief that your values comes from having answers. Changing your relationship with your humanity is a practice, not a destination. But with each moment you choose honesty over performance, with each time you admit you're struggling instead of pretending you're fine, with each step towards being the patient instead of always the healer, you weaken the patterns hold on your life. You'll begin to discover what Dr.